All right, it's been a couple weeks. Thanksgiving is a week away, roughly. What is your favorite Thanksgiving dish? What are you looking forward to eating?
So here's an odd one. I don't even know what it's called. Well,
An
maybe it's more
odd
like one
one.
of those family tradition type things, and it's a dessert. Surprising for me because I love sweets, but it's like a jello on top, and then it has like a thin, like I would say like a cold cream thing, and then a cookie bottom.
Cookie.
So
Okay.
again, I have no idea what this is called.
I don't
My
either.
mom and my aunt make it. Only time that we ever have is Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it's like this
Wait,
time of
is it
year.
Jello? You say
It's
Jello on
jello on
top?
top. Jello
Yeah,
on
yeah,
top.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. My
Yeah.
mom used to make this,
Okay.
and the on the bottom was actually pretzel, like crushed up
Yeah.
pretzels.
It's a pretzel crust. Like, yeah.
Dude, it's great.
Yeah.
It's
It's
great.
great, right?
I don't like Jello. I'm not into whipped cream. Pretzels are okay, but you put the three together
It is
and
great.
it's amazing.
Yes. Yes. And
Yes.
the whole family loves it. It's just kind of actually surprising that no one bothers to make it the rest of the year. It's just kind of funny given
I
how
know.
much everyone likes it. I
Oh,
mean, people
yeah,
are
it's a
taking it
banger.
during dinner. So it's like almost like, you'll have all your courses, and then people will start grabbing it and start eating it with their dinner just because
Yes.
it's like so popular. So anyway,
Yes.
what about you?
Oh, well, now that you mentioned that, I wasn't even going to say, I was just going to say stuffing. I like stuffing. But that Jello cream, well, my mom passed away a few years ago. I actually haven't had it since.
Okay.
But man, it's delicious. It's delicious. Whatever that thing is called, you need to
Isn't it
name it.
funny that we don't have a name for it? Like
I
people,
know,
I don't
it's
even
like
know
the
what.
Jello pretzel thingy,
Right.
and you ask for it and everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay, well, we're on the same page, man. For Thanksgiving,
Locked in.
I'm gonna grab some of that this year if I can find it. All right, well, it's been a couple of weeks. We've had, I don't know, an election, a Fed meeting, market rally, market cool off. There's been some stuff going on in the last couple of weeks. So let's jump right in. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, let's do it. Okay, welcome back to the Casual Fridays Financial Insights podcast. My name is Brian Ullman. I'm a financial advisor here at Ford Financial Group, joined by Ryan Louie, also a Ford financial advisor, certified financial planner here at Ford Financial Group. If you're listening to this on our podcast, audio podcast, I encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other places where you can get podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to that too. We post these on YouTube, the video version of this, and of course we reference charts and things oftentimes, and so it's helpful to watch this on YouTube. But we also post other stuff on YouTube when we have client events, when it's appropriate, when we're able to. We'll try and include those maybe after the fact. So worth subscribing. Also, just quickly, if we're going through this stuff and you have questions about what we're covering or questions about things you'd like us to cover, you can email us at info@fordfg.com. That's the general mailbox. You can also email Ryan directly, or you can email me directly, or your advisor directly if you're already working with an advisor here. But info@fordfg.com is the general inbox. We can get the email forwarded to whoever it needs to be forwarded to, answer your questions on the recording, on the podcast, and address things like Roth conversions or alternative investments or target date funds in your 401k. There's all sorts of stuff that we can cover, right, Ryan?
Oh, for sure. I am getting a lot of Roth conversion calls right now.
Yeah, which is interesting because if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act gets I mean, I was getting those calls when there was some worry about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act not getting extended, and so they want to take that opportunity before tax rates went up.
I have clients that do it every year, and so like this is the time of year which we take care of it, just in November. So it's not, they don't have questions as much as they want to just start going over what their number is and then actually executing it before the year ends.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's been almost exactly 2 weeks since we've cut one of these. We were headed into the election. If I recall correctly, we were just simply hoping that it was going to be over within a day or two. It was over the night of, quite frankly. I mean, Trump won running away pretty much.
Pretty decisively.
Yeah, I mean, the concession speech from the vice president didn't come until the day after, but it was pretty much a done deal. I guess the betting prediction markets were correct on that.
It was actually probably the one thing to follow to get kind of a good sense of where the momentum was going. Again, I was in New York, so I was kind of watching that as a gauge of where things stood at nighttime. Now, granted, I was
Sure.
3 hours ahead of you guys, so it was a little later there.
Yep.
So still earlier, generally speaking, but you kind of saw the betting markets just continually start moving up higher and higher and higher, which gave you the gauge of it's going to be hard for things to turn around when the momentum was heading the way that it was heading with the betting markets.
Yeah. And you know, it especially with all the polling that goes on and how bad the polling's been over these last couple of election cycles, nobody really knew kind of what to believe as we were heading into the evening. I think everyone thought it was going to be close, and it was close from popular election kind of perspective. I mean, Trump very clearly won the popular vote, but it wasn't Reagan,
a landslide.
Mondale like lopsided, right? So we woke up, we got through Wednesday, and then a day later on the 7th, we had a Fed meeting where the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 0.25%. I think you said you expected for that to happen, didn't you?
Right. I think that, you know, the market priced in a cut coming.
Sure.
And it happened. Now we roll into, you know, what's going to happen in December. And then, like I said, like I always, you know, everyone wants to know what's going to happen at the next meeting once the last one happens.
I want to know too.
Yep.
You know, we don't have the answer all the time. Fed meets on the 18th again. So the 18th of September and the 18th of December. What do you think? We're getting another 0.25%?
I think that's kind of in the cards right now. It keeps the momentum going. And then honestly, if they deviated after this, I don't know that it wouldn't be what the markets necessarily wanted, but I don't know how much it would necessarily, you know, surprise them. Like it's hard for my whole thesis was you cut the first time, you can't just stop there. Right. Like it's just, that'd be very unusual. And so, you know, they need to string this along for at least a little bit. Before maybe pivoting and saying they're going to stop. They're not going to raise interest rates, but you know they could foreseeably stop if some kind of data came out to support their reason to stop.
Well, they could cut rates 0.25% and then signal that they're close to the neutral rate that in their belief, you know, cut it 2 more times next year. That's still well below where everybody thought we were. There was some expectation they were going to cut 7 times in January this year. They thought they were going to cut 7 times over the course of the year. Right. So it's still quite a bit less than what we've had. We'll see. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of job openings, not a whole lot of turnover, not a lot of new job creation. I don't think we're going to have a bad jobs report as we get into December. For the November jobs report shouldn't be too bad. I would expect the December jobs report to be too bad in January because you have all that seasonal hiring. Right. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the jobs market started to kind of loosen up again as we were in the spring. And that could actually increase interest rate. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that has to go.
There's a lot of ways to play, and that's why I think the Federal Reserve and trying to predict where they're going to go has been so tough. And how long we've been dealing with this. I mean, it's literally been years, and we just still have not been like, okay, I think that we can move on from paying attention to the Fed so much. No, it's just been consistently like what's going to go on and like how much is that going to impact the markets, how much it's going to impact the economy. It's the same old story.
It is. And speaking of markets, we're taking a look here. We're just checking in on things like we normally do when we begin. Year to date, S&P 500 up north. This is through the close on the 20th. S&P 500 up more than 24% on the year. NASDAQ up nearly 23%. Dow's up a little bit better than 15%. And the aggregate bond index up a little bit better than 1.5%. Where, it was up, almost 6% at one point in September, Ryan, and bonds now have given some back. In fact, if we take a look month to date, you can see all the indices are hovering around the high 3s. So very close. And the ag is actually negative. It dropped the day after the election on November 6th, climbed up into positive territory for the month and is back below. I mean, yields moving higher, some worries about, we're going to talk a little bit about the debt and deficits. You think that's what's manifesting here?
I think a little bit played into it, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit more earlier than the elections, just because it was one of those topics that got put out there. So
Sure.
maybe some eyes get on it. And I don't know that that was the main reason, because again, debt is hard, and institutions moving money in the bond market makes a little bit more sense to me. Why yields change so much. I don't know that they're putting bets on debt and moving the markets because of that at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, so what we're talking about today really is, the national debt, and because it's approaching $36 trillion here very shortly. Neither candidate was interested in addressing any of the problems with our debt to GDP, which is what's reflected here in this chart, or the federal deficit, and it's exploded under both parties, so no one can claim fiscal responsibility here. So, as we turn our attention to the next administration and the cabinet nominations and policy proposals, I think this kind of has some people's attention, because we're going to hit the debt ceiling early next year. Probably won't be a problem with one party controlling Congress that they'll be able to raise the debt ceiling. We're not going to have one of those fights. But there's no getting around the fact that the national debt has grown significantly. It's almost doubled since 2008 and now represents 120% of GDP. I don't know how sustainable this is,
Yeah, this is maybe to get people kind of on more of a layman's way of looking at this too, is thinking about it from like more of a personal standpoint, right? Like you can't, if you were an individual and your debt was just it was going up year after year and for long periods of time, debt now turns into decade after decade. It's not reasonable to think that it's sustainable without having some kind of issue that you're going to have to deal with down the road. Now, there are obviously differences between the US and an individual. I'm just saying that from a debt perspective, when you look at it, and I think a lot of people, don't necessarily pay attention to it. They hear it in the news, but again, when it continues to go up, it doesn't make sense that you could do that as an individual and not have some consequences. I do think that there's some potential consequences as this gets larger. We'll probably talk about like, where's the line in the sand, right? And that's the hard part, because there's no such thing as a line in the sand in terms of like how high the number could go before you actually, need to do something.
Right. Well, and so this begs the question, how did we get here? How did the total debt, which is the total outstanding debt, equal 120% of GDP? The net debt, this 95% number that you're looking at, is actually it actually excludes what's held. The government can hold its own debt, right?
We the people, the government.
Yeah. And so if you exclude treasuries held by government agencies, it's 95% of GDP. Still awful. More than 90% is not a good look. But how do we get here? Well, it's that we spend more than we bring in. And this is our federal.
This is just like on the personal side. We as Americans are very good at spending. So is the government, right? The U.S. government is great at spending money. The red bars obviously show points where you had a deficit, and the blue bars are when you had a surplus. But sure. Like looking at this from a more recent modern standpoint, from obviously in the 40s you had the World War that you had to take on debt to help spend, but more recently I think you could point to the global financial crisis and COVID, right? Really being large spikes.
Sure.
We were spending money regardless, right? We were creating debt regardless. Yep. But when you have such issues like you did during the financial crisis and COVID, where you had to put so much money into the economy, that just exacerbated it, substantially.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting right now is that we're at the current deficit's around 6% of GDP, not far off the average deficit of 4%. So small compared to where we were even just a couple of years ago, certainly less than where we were during the global financial crisis. Interestingly, though, that historically deficits improve as an economy stabilizes. But one could argue we have a pretty stable economy right now, and we're still running these deficits. So we're not, COVID, global financial crisis, sure. Great Depression obviously kind of really messes with this on the far left side of this chart. And those are examples of emergencies, right? Where we're going overboard for this. But I would say they were nowhere near an emergency right now. I think interestingly, though, you look back in the 80s and even the early 90s, this was going on kind of to the same degree with several years there in the mid 80s, where the average deficit was 5% or so of GDP and things were humming along.
Right. And I think that's that kind of what this speaks to, is that we're very good at spending money from a governmental standpoint. Yep. And it doesn't really necessarily mean that it's only been a phenomenon of the last couple of decades, or the last few decades. It's been more of a historical, issue that's been on hand. It's just now getting so bad that we have to really consider what to do with it. Yeah.
Well, it got really ugly for several years in a row during the global financial crisis, and that 15% in 2021, goodness. that's terrible. I know it's COVID, but damn. But I think a lot of people just think wistfully about the, 80s during Reagan years and small government. No, the federal budget deficit to GDP was still not great. It was worse then than it was in the 60s and 70s. And I don't know. I find it interesting. There's enough bad here to share among everybody, every elected official, every political party. It's been going on for a really, really long time. And so the unfortunate reality here is that it's not going away, right? Because even with a right-sized budget, the debt is still there. And the last balanced budget occurred during the Clinton years. And I remember that because it was Clinton and Newt Gingrich that were sorting that out. And then it was the Nixon administration before that. And so I read, we are going to service, the amount we service on the debt is going to outpace defense spending shortly, which is pretty incredible that we are now in such a hole that we have to spend this much on interest payments.
So maybe like back up a little bit here is what the interest was to where it is now, because we've talked ad nauseum about what the Fed has done with interest rates. The interest rates went up, and with the Fed raising interest rates, those are very much tied to the U.S. government paying more on its debt, right? We went through a period of time for quite a while where interest rates were low. We all remember those times when interest rates were at 0%. Mortgages were, sub 3%. And during those times, the government's not paying that much on their debt because interest rates are low, right? Just like us as an individual, you get a cheap loan on your mortgage. You're not paying that much on your mortgage then. And the same thing was happening with the government. But then, like all of us, and the government too, when interest rates have now shot up over the last couple of years, it means that anyone that has a loan, interest is going to be more expensive. And that's what we're dealing with as a government now. And it's become, like you said, it's become and getting much larger, a bigger portion of our GDP. It's just like a bigger portion of our overall expenses is now being allocated to just interest payments.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because you look at this and you're like, oh, this is going to create a whole lot of financial stress. But whenever we have financial stress, people run to treasuries and the rates go lower. So, it's hard to say exactly how people are going to react. And this isn't, there's some more things at play here, right, than just the amount of debt. We've got, the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. There's some other factors at play that if you looked at this without some of that context, you'd say, oh, the US is going off a cliff. We're not going off a cliff. We're on a pretty lousy trajectory, but it's not dire. This certainly wouldn't cause you to look at your 401k and say, I'm going to cash, right? We're not doing that.
Yeah, I mean that goes into like a whole, I guess, different discussion, right? I would not relate any of what we're talking about right now to the investments,
To
right?
portfolio. Nope.
Right, like we're not here saying, "Oh, trajectory is bad on the debt, therefore we need to be more into X, Y, or Z and less into stocks or bonds or whatever it may be." This isn't driving allocation changes. This is not driving whether you should be in the markets or not.
No.
No, nor like is it having any effect on what I say, like timing of your retirement, right? Like these are
Right.
this is not impacting that. This is a really just more bigger discussion and concern of like where we're going as a nation,
Right.
which can definitely down the road impact things. But like I said, right
Sure.
now, because there's no line in the sand, you can't make an investment decision based on this.
No, and there's no appetite to make I would say where it could affect your portfolio is the government starts getting serious about making cuts to things. But that's not at all what's happening now either. So you look at this and you say, this is ugly, but it's not actionable yet. I think that's, I don't want to say the takeaway ultimately is none of this matters, but because it does matter to us, certainly as citizens and in the governance of our country. But does it matter to your investments today? Probably not.
Right.
An interesting breakdown. This isn't the normal kind of diversification stuff, but it still is relevant, and I think comes on the heels of some of the concerns that investors have had during that election process. So without getting into the election or without getting into either candidate, because neither one really was addressing this stuff during the campaign. This is something that was going to be facing either this next president, who's going to be Trump now, or whoever comes after him, because very quickly we're going to start running into walls like with Social Security, right?
Correct.
So we're losing road on which we can kick the can. It's coming. It's pulling forward here.
I think we all believe that the government is very good at like not dealing with the major problems, kicking the can down the road.
Sure.
We know as citizens that Social Security, Medicare, like all the funding on that is kind of tenuous and something that needs to be addressed, but yet no one. No, it's not really like we can change. You and I can change it.
Yeah.
Like government themselves, politicians just don't want to touch this.
Yeah.
And so that becomes part of the problem is that you need someone that's going to want to actually face this.
Sure.
Just again, like you would have to face this in a household. Like if you had a debt problem, you're going to have to face and do something eventually, right? And you have to deal with it. You would hope that the government too decides that someone's brave enough, I guess, to take this on.
Yeah, it's got to take some guts. And we have a lot of people who want to politic but not govern, I think is
correct.
Is my take on it. What Churchill said, I think I'm going to butcher this, but you can count on Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options. And so we're going to screw this up until we stop screwing it up, is my guess.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not too painful when we have to take the medicine for some of the sins that have been committed here for decades, in terms of how we've managed our country's finances. Okay. What's on your mind this week?
I'll do a small recap. I said last time I was going to New York. Obviously, I'm back from it. It was overall a good trip.
What did you watch? You asked me what to watch. What did you watch on the plane?
I watched like YouTube videos. I didn't even watch it.
Oh man.
Yeah. So no, it didn't come. And I will say, like on the way back, my wife this is maybe the first time that she was in charge of like just taking care of the plane trip. Usually I'll do it. So we had 2 stopovers on the way back. I was sick on the first one. And we still had, I was sick by the time we landed in Chicago. Then we had to go to LA and then we had to go to Fresno. So it was not a fun trip on the way back. It was like it took 13 hours from the hotel to our house.
Yeah.
It was, so I wasn't really watching much. I was trying to sleep, but I couldn't. But so I didn't have as much time as I said I was going to.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the way there, I was just kind of bumbling around in terms of shows. But as far as New York goes, I love going to cities. Obviously, I was born and raised, never left Fresno, smaller city in comparison, to these major cities. I love the energy of New York. a city where you could like walk around to get to this. I really do enjoy that, where I don't have to get into cars like we do here in Fresno. The first night that we were there, got in at like 11:30 to the hotel, 11:30 at night. Of course, it's a little early. It's a little earlier still on the West Coast. So the boys and I, we went out. We went to go grab pizza. We walked about a mile, went through Times Square. It's midnight by the time we get to the pizza place, and they saw vendors out in the streets.
It's buzzing,
selling stuff. I
love New York.
Carts are still there, open. It was so busy. I mean, it felt like it was like 9 o'clock.
It's great.
It's amazing the energy, and again, love walking around, being able to walk around and see things as opposed to having to always get around by car.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall the trip was great. Probably do it again, but I don't know that we'll do it anytime soon. I might have to go to the U.S. Open. More than anything will be my next itch.
Yeah. Now you're talking. Good. Yeah. Well, good.
Yeah.
I will say this week I've got a couple of things. Speaking of tennis, I've been demoing rackets. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to turn this into a tennis podcast, 20 minutes in, but I'm learning new things about myself with the racket that I like, and the string that I like, and the tension that I like that I didn't know that I liked.
That's when you know that you like. You've gone to like maybe a different level where you could tell the difference. If you generally speaking, you hand somebody that's new a racket, they can't, they're not going to really be able to tell the difference between any of the nuances of any of those. Different racket, different strings, different grip size, any of that. They're just trying to, focus on getting the ball in.
Yeah, I've come to learn kind of what strings I think I like. But now I'm messing with tensions where I've never really messed with tensions before, and it's eye opening. Where I'm liking a control racket with lower tension, so I still keep the power, but you gotta
hone in the control.
Yeah, I've got the control from the racket, but the power from the string. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, I don't want to turn this into a tennis podcast either, but just for people that don't know, so I've messed around with this as well. When you get to the string part, problem is that when you mess around with strings, is that there's all kinds of variety of different strings, different brands that you can put in, different gauges, which is like the thickness of the string, right? Strings cost, I'm going to say $15 to $20. If you're not stringing the racket yourself, you're probably paying another $25, $30. So every time that you're like, I'm going to tinker with this, I don't like, and a lot of times it's because I don't like this. I can't keep playing with it, so I do need to change it. It's it's like a $40 or $50 change to say, this isn't working for me.
I don't know. Compared to golf, it's still cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I don't know. I like to dabble, but I'm getting. Now I'm really dabbling. So we'll see. I think I'm switching from head to bob a lot. With lower tension. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Offline, I'll have to talk to you about what strings you use.
Yeah. I'll get into it with you. But the thing that I really had down for what was on my mind was that I was glued to the television for the Tyson fight last weekend. Did you watch Tyson?
No, I did not.
So I will tell you a quick story, because as you know, I am no longer practicing, but in a different lifetime, I was an attorney. I was a practicing attorney. You can still see. How am I going to do this? Right? No. Right here. It says JD. That's my law degrees, right? One of the reasons why I went to law school, or where it started me on the path, was when I was in 4th grade. We were at a family friend's house. We were there for dinner. We finished up dinner, and I mentioned that the Tyson fight was on. And the dad of the household was like, "Oh, really? I didn't know that. Like, did you want to watch it?" Well, it's pay-per-view, so we can't watch it, but I'm curious. I was into Tyson. And he goes, "Oh, okay." And he picks up the phone, dials the number. He said he had satellite dish. He lived out in the country. He said, "Hey, sweetheart. Yeah, I need the Tyson fight. Yeah, can you put it on the TV?" "Okay, cool. Thanks." Puts down the phone. Tyson fight's on TV. And I was like, oh my God. He was a lawyer. Oh my God. I need to be that. If I can just call and say, "Hey, sweetheart," right? And so this was a different time also where you could call someone sweetheart on the operator on the phone. But either way, that started me with, my next essay in 4th grade was what I wanted to be when I grow up. I want to be an attorney.
I want to be able to turn on the Tyson fight whenever I
wanted. So like, I'm all in. I've watched every single Tyson fight through college and everything. So I was glued to the TV. Did you watch it, Ryan?
I did not. And it's partially because
You didn't miss anything.
I felt like it was too much going to be involved in entertainment and not the realism of what it could be. I don't know if that's really the case or what. It just seems like sometimes this stuff is almost a little bit too much make believe in terms of what they're actually trying to do versus what they can do.
Yeah, it was either Tyson was gassed early on and didn't have his legs, or he was pulling his punches. Either way, it wasn't sporting at all. Whether it's a fraud or, this guy just doesn't have it, and this was a big payday. I know he made $20 million off of it, and Jake Paul, the other guy, made $40 million off of this, and it was an absolute spectacle. My kids were interested in checking it out, and so it was kind of fun. But they were just kind of pawing at each other. The rounds were 2 minutes instead of 3. It went 8 rounds instead of 12. It was a total exhibition. Thank God, nobody paid for it. It was a part of Netflix, right? So anyway, I don't know. So that's what was on my mind here most recently. I think we had talked, we didn't even cover this, but the other thing that's been on some investors' minds is NVIDIA earnings. We won't get into it, but they nearly doubled their revenue on demand for their AI chips. Markets are reacting a little bit, and they're kind of relatively flat after hours. So maybe at first blush, NVIDIA delivered what they thought, but that's kind of the bellwether, right, for all this AI tech growth stuff. So we'll see. Maybe that's something we address.
Yeah, for growth, I think that's the key thing that you said is like growth stocks and technology stocks. We kind of need NVIDIA to keep at least chugging along, right? Because I think that if you saw a significant drop off, you might have others follow suit, and so. Yep. It is important for them. Their earnings are really important for us, obviously, with AI, and they build new chips, right? It's just like it's the new and latest thing. And so everyone has to have it. And they'll just come out with a new one after a new one. And these technology companies need and want it. So the demand speaks to, as long as they keep creating chips and there's this war going on for AI, there's going to be a demand for it. So people can say, can use the latest chips. And so that's what
it's a proxy for tech growth, right?
Yes.
And so if NVIDIA is not growing, then the other names aren't growing either because the demand for the chips aren't. Anyway, maybe this is something we'll cover next time, but it was interesting. This was the thing. I mean, CNBC covers this stuff like a sporting event, right? So they lead up to the Federal Reserve decision, and then after the Federal Reserve decision, they talk about it for another 2 hours. Same thing today with NVIDIA. What's going to happen? Then it happens, and then now for the next few hours, they're going to dissect whatever it is. So until the next thing, of course.
Right.
All right, Ryan, we'll leave it there. Have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll be doing this. I'll be asking you next about how your Christmas shopping's going.
Okay. I'll save you a piece of Jell-O too if someone makes it in our household.
Please. Awesome. All right. Till next time.
All right.